Welcome back, everybody. I have the pleasure of speaking with Mickey O'Sullivan. You know Mickey from The Chi or Chicago PD. I know him as an actor in my Chi-town who's been very willing and able to help when a question arises. He's also a person that inspires me to get better abs. Welcome, Mickey.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing well. It's good to talk to you. I know that before I had this show, a long time before I had this show, I still had a lot of questions as I was getting started as an actor, and you were one of the folks that was kind enough to provide some answers. So I appreciate that.
Of course, I'm glad I was able to help.
You were. As you and I were trying to get this set up in terms of the finding the proper dates for the taping, you mentioned, okay, let's just do this after my birthdays, and it was more than one. So happy belated. And before we
Thank
go any
you.
further, what's up with having more than one birthday?
Yeah, so I was born on June 16th, but my doctor put June 15th on my birth certificate, and then my dad said rather than deal with the hassle of changing such a trivial thing, we can allow him to celebrate by drinking a day earlier in his life. And that's the Irish way.
So now you celebrate on both, or do you celebrate on the 15th primarily?
I think that we should all be celebrating more than one birthday. I think that it's a fantastic way to live, and if you're only going to celebrate yourself once a year, you're missing out.
All right. Well, I'll see if I can do it twice. And
Celebrate the
speaking,
whole month if you want to, though. I mean, absolutely.
not a
Nobody is
bad
stopping
idea.
you.
Not a bad idea. We'll see what my wife says in terms of getting me more than one present on different
Oh,
days.
well, no presents involved there. No presents. You give presents to yourself every day of that month. That's all.
Come on, I can take the same idea as the Hanukkah and the number of days of consecutive presents, and we can make that for a birthday as well. I think my kids will be up for it.
You're going to need to get an Amazon wish list together.
Sounds good. We'll post that underneath it. See what people think that I should have
There
on.
you go.
Um, Speaking of doing things more than once, I see that on Chicago PD you managed to play three separate characters. How did that happen?
That's a great question. I think that's a question that would probably be better answered by producers or casting directors. I just know that um, in Chicago there is a rule that you cannot be on those shows. You have to have a 2-year hiatus essentially. So if your character pops up, you can't play another character for at least 2 years. And I think it's like a soft rule, right? I've always been somebody who's changed the way that I look. I mean, look at me right now. I have a mustache and I look like I might be in the Caribbean. And I like to live that way. I don't like to have to model myself after a headshot I took 2 years ago. And so I'm sure that had something to do with it, that I looked a little bit different. But I also, I don't know. Yeah, I guess I don't really know how that worked out. But I know that clearly I did something, right? Like if you're not getting back on one of those shows, I don't know. I feel like part of it is that, when I went there, I was treated like family and I treated them like family. And that makes it easier to bring somebody back, I think. I
Yeah,
don't know.
great job. Again, you've done the co-star and then you went to a recurring guest star. So they certainly like you as a family. That's evident. Um,
Got
and
lucky.
just Yeah, it's cool. And just kind of out of curiosity, because you've been on PD, does that mean that you cannot be on Fire and on Med unless there is some sort of a crossover event?
We'll see. I'm certainly dead as Detective Doyle. Dead as a doornail, so I don't think they're bringing him back. Can I play a different character? Maybe. I think they did just get a nod for a few more seasons. Uh,
Mhm.
I certainly wouldn't turn down an opportunity to work on a network TV show. But hopefully starting to branch a little bit more outside of Chicago as well.
Yeah, and I actually want to get into that, but let's stay on the Shy track for a second.
Sure,
You
sure.
play Chef Den on the Shy. I'm not going to lie. I have not watched The Shy. It's been on my
Oh,
it's been on my radar. I've watched you as Chef Dan. I've seen your work on it, but I haven't watched the show. I'm actually looking forward to seeing it. It's making its way up my list of I need to watch this, and
good.
it's going there. So, but watching you in the little that I have watched so far as being Chef Dan, you seem, aside from very good in the role, you seem to be very much at ease in the kitchen with the actual role of the chef. And I know that you were in the pilot episode, so it's not like you had 6 months to prepare on how to be a chef. So what was your preparation like on being able to step in and look the part right away?
Um, kind of luck, right? So I wasn't the original selection for that role. They had somebody else. They shot the first 2 episodes, and then I came in. They reshot the episodes with me, and so I came in on June 3rd. I think I got hired on July 2nd. There was at that point there was some discrepancy on whether or not SAG was going to strike or not the next day, and so this would have been my first day on set. So thankfully they had negotiated the deal. I got to set, and yeah, I think my goal was less about acting and more about not getting fired, right? Like, I think maybe I treat most of my jobs that way, right? Like, there is a certain amount I can do on camera, but there's a lot more that I have control of off of the camera. I want, especially when I'm playing somebody who I would categorize as an awful human being for one way or another. I like to make other people feel comfortable, and like that there is a collaborative sense there, and I enjoy having fun. So that was my main goal when I showed up was, don't get fired. Take good direction, make it to the second episode, and if you can make it to the second episode, you can keep on learning and growing. I guess I've had jobs in kitchens before, so maybe that helped a little bit. Certainly after I shot season 1, I decided that it would be a good idea for me to learn a little bit more like knife skills.
Yeah.
And so I practiced some of that, but most of it's just I don't know. I didn't find myself prepping for the profession of the role, but more of the relationships, the dialogue, the scene study of it. Everything else is kind of business that you can learn on set if you need to, and there's always consultants there, so that's nice.
So does Casey expect you to to cook at home, or that's still off the table?
Oh, but I guess there's a difference, right? Cooking and I play a head chef at a restaurant and an
Yeah.
executive chef at a restaurant, and I learned very quickly the difference between being being a cook. I tend to not follow a recipe, not considering how much of the food I have in my kitchen and whether or not I have to cook for 40 people next day. And if I have that in my budget, I am just sitting there throwing butter and salt at things and hoping it tastes good. So, but I enjoy cooking. I think maybe part of that is because I like moving and shaking and focusing on something. Like you can't not be present while you're cooking because you'll set your kitchen on fire.
Yeah, cut yourself plenty of times. My nephew is a chef, so I've seen kind of him grow in that, and it's always interesting to watch because he's completely in his element. It's fascinating.
Does he
Um,
cook at home?
he does, yeah, he does. As a matter of fact, I'm going
Oh,
over to his house later today because during COVID he wanted to experiment, so now he's baking bread. So he's doing sourdough
oh,
bread.
nice.
So I'm gonna go and try some out. I found that I'm not a picky eater, and I'm not a somebody who is a culinary snob, if you will. So I grab what I like, and I'm done with it. When I went to his restaurant in Highland Park when he was there, um, and I looked at the menu, and I didn't want to be rude to him, but nothing on the menu looked good to me. It was complex. It was all sorts of things, and I'm like, I love my nephew. He's like a younger brother to me, but I don't know if I'm going to enjoy anything here. So I needed to kind of prepare myself for how to break that to him. And fortunately, he didn't make me order. He just said, "You're sitting here. I'm bringing stuff to you. I'm going to do a mix of all sorts of things." And he kept on bringing stuff out. There's not one thing that I didn't think was the best thing that I've ever tried. So that for me was the first time I understood, okay, that's what a real restaurant is like. That's what a real chef is like. I need to learn a lot more.
Sure, sure, sure.
You've done a ton of commercials. You've done stuff for
Yeah, I have.
Capital One, Blackhawks, which I want to dive into because you're a hockey guy. And then I see you in a Packers uniform. Man, come on. That's not good.
Oh man, that was a wild day. I was terribly. So now in the time of COVID, I think I'm learning a little bit more about when to show up to work and when not to. But at that point, I had just gotten done doing an improv show, and I wasn't feeling super hot, but I had a call time the next morning up in Green Bay, and I had already rented a car, and so it was time to go up there. About halfway through, through the drive, I was terribly sick, barely made it up there, barely got to sleep, and I made it through that next day. The night quill or the day quill that I bought at the hotel across the street must have really done the job, because I made it to the next moment that they yelled cut, and then I ran back to the trailer to make friends with the toilet. So, but it was actually a pretty wild experience, just from a perspective of somebody who I don't really follow football very much. I don't have an allegiance one way or another, but that land is like holy land to them. It's incredible. That stadium has some sort of history that makes it feel special. So that was my takeaway.
I was teaching in Green Bay a while back, and I obviously packed town, and I asked them about other sports, and they looked at me and said, "What other sports?" And I understood that's what it is like in Green Bay, which makes sense. Now it's a gig is a gig, of course, but I'm sure you probably got crap from your Chicago buddies about that one.
I'm sure, yeah.
In terms of Blackhawks, I mean, for a guy who grew up playing hockey and actually wanted to make it a profession, from what I understand, how was that to do a Blackhawk spot?
Oh, a blast. And also, you find yourself kind of, as somebody who understands the culture of the fan there, I found myself knowing a little bit more about what a national anthem is like there. For people who don't know, it's a pretty rowdy event. It's not quiet. It's loud, and I think when you're a commercial director coming into town, you don't necessarily have that knowledge. And so there was part of it that was bringing authenticity to what that meant. But also, I think the audition, I went in there and the casting director was like, "Okay, I'm gonna let you slate, and then don't stop talking until you've convinced me that you need to be in this commercial." It went on for like 5 minutes, just going on and on about my history with the team. My mom used to babysit, or my mom used to clean houses for a few of the players, and I used to babysit for some of those players. And I just remember going to games when tickets were like $8, and I'd be with all my friends there, looking up to some of the players personally and professionally, and just a pure love for hockey. So yeah, it was a blast. And like you said, a gig is a gig, but some things have a little bit more meaning to you and special. But I think the hardest part was that year they did so poorly that they didn't make it to the playoffs. And if they would have made it to the playoffs, I have a feeling that spot would have got extended. And that would have been a little bit more money in my pocket from the Chicago Blackhawks. But that's okay.
Which players' kids did you get to babysit?
Sure. So Steve Sullivan, Michael Nylander. Michael Nylander is, was the main person, and his two kids. One of his kids plays for the Blackhawks now. So both of those kids were enormously good. I remember having to like referee them in little like street hockey matches, and they'd be fighting like brothers. Um, but they grew up and got drafted 8th overall in consecutive years. So one of them 8th overall the first year, and then the next year, sure enough, 8th overall. So it's been fun to watch them and their careers kind of blossom. Um, remember doing some work for Chelios's house and getting lost in his basement. He had like a roller rink in his basement. I got lost in there. I just couldn't find my way out. Tennis courts in the backyard. Um, so that was kind of my glimpse at a different life as a kid.
That's awesome. Is that why you kind of fell in love with hockey and you wanted to make it into a career if you could?
No, I think that came a little bit after I knew what I wanted to do. I think I joined back into hockey. I took a break from hockey because it was too expensive. My mom, as a single mom, was having trouble affording everything, let alone hockey, which is by far one of the most expensive sports that you can get yourself into. And I started to get into quite a bit of trouble in junior high. And my mom, what do we have to do? You know, you're like, one road is going to lead you to juvie and one road isn't. What is this other road? And I said I want to play hockey, and she was like, okay, so that's got to be your thing. So I remember spending quite a bit of time in my garage practicing. Because the way that I figured it, most of the people that I'd be playing against or playing with, playing since they've been 2 or 3 years old. And now I have a lot of catch up to do. So the time that maybe I would have been spending riding bikes around or stealing bikes or getting into fights, I was spending in my garage shooting pucks or stick handling or exercising or working out. And then she started getting, she was a single mom, a lot of different jobs to support us. And one of those jobs, she started a cleaning business and got referred to, I think, Chris Chelios, and Chris Chelios referred to Steve Sullivan, and then to Michael Nylander, and you know, so on and so forth. When you have somebody who you know that works well, you recommend them, and it just so happened that it was the sport I loved dearly. Michael was super kind to me. He gave me rollerblades when I was trying to get in shape during the summer and couldn't afford ice time. So yeah, just really solid and just kind of kismet.
That's nice. So what happened? Why wasn't it a career for you?
Oh, that's a good question. If I'm being honest, I think probably I was not good enough. I think I could have played for a few more years. I had an injury, and in the time it would have taken me to rehabilitate that injury, I think I was already too far behind. And so there was this sense, I was kind of bitter, I was kind of upset. And at that point, I had moved away from home to compete in hockey. We had some family trouble. My grandmother passed away from cancer after about a year-long battle, and so I was coming back and forth. And at that point, I think my priority would have had to have been rehabilitating that injury and getting right back into it. And I didn't. And instead, I had a teacher from high school pull me aside and ask me if I wanted to be in Beauty and the Beast, at which point I was like, no way. And then he convinced me. And that was kind of a trend. My senior year, the theater teacher brought in a lot of the jocks, so called. Um, and I mean, for when you think about it, like theater is one of the most physical forms of arts that you could do besides dance, and and sometimes it is dance that you're doing. So I definitely think that I stole a little bit of training from my hockey training, right, and applied that to my acting. I had a director approach me a few years ago and asked me if I wanted to do this show, and I was like, I'm not much of a physical theater actor. And then she came to see me in the show, and she was like, that's a lie. Like, you're throwing your body around the entire time. You're like one of the most physical actors I know. And it took me a little bit to realize that that probably came from being more of an athlete. So.
For some reason, Happy Gilmore comes to mind. That whole process of thinking of yourself as a hockey player and being a golfer. For you, it's thinking as a hockey player.
There was definitely some anger issues as a kid that led to playing hockey for sure, but that's another story.
In doing the prep and kind of knowing what I know about you, you've done all the Chicago, not all the Chicago TV shows, but you've done most of the Chicago TV shows. You've done a ton of theater. You've done a lot of commercials. You were born in New York. You studied in New York as well. You worked in New York. Knowing that New York is a big market and you kind of got to where you are in Chicago, why not move?
That's a good question. I haven't felt the career need to. Like this past year, I worked in South Korea. I got that job. This past year, I worked in Michigan. I worked in Indiana. I worked in Texas. I've worked all over the place, and I haven't felt the need. I've been approached by a number of managers. I was represented in LA for a bit. Lived in LA. I've done that. I like Chicago. A good career here. I've got a family here. With work, it's you get a phone call and you go, and I have no problem with that. But I don't dig sitting in traffic. I like riding my bike to auditions. I think I've kind of found my life here right now, and obviously all that changes with an opportunity here or there. That's the kind of life that I like.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you. In terms of kind of working, I know you hustle and you grind and you work a lot, and you're a working actor and you're successful at it. So the last 3 or 4 months when you haven't been able to work, how was that in terms of being able to kind of keep afloat from a financial perspective?
Good. Financially, I've put myself in a good position where I wasn't terrified of not working for a little while. I have opportunities to bring in money through coaching, though I'm not relying on that. And most of that money is going directly towards organizations that I support. So, I think my life has been a series of kismet, fate of me saying, hey, I really like a little bit of time where the next day isn't dictated by an email that I get at 8 p.m. saying that, like, okay, tomorrow you have to show up at this place and do this thing, and now tonight you have to memorize this script. And while I love that, part of me was asking for a little bit of respite, and I got it. That being said, I mean, I think you can see in this background here, I've got a little bit of art department stuff up here. I do a little bit of just producing on my own, a little bit of writing, a little bit of producing and self-directing. And so that's been an opportunity to kind of practice some of that. Auditions still come in, even during COVID, you're getting random stay-at-home tapes, and so there's been a little bit of practice here or there, but I find myself, like, even this morning, I took a downtown and back because I just missed the commute. I miss that part of, like getting up and going to do something and then coming back and resuming with your life. And the level of activity there is really important to me. I find that I am a happier person when I'm active. And I think maybe that's why I chose to be an actor subconsciously, is because it's different every day. And there's a sense of adventure. You can learn that you're using your body, you're using your mind, your soul, your emotions. So, yeah, it's been nice, actually. It's been nice.
Very cool. You have a tattoo that says "Live Without Limits." When did you get it and why?
I got out of a 3-year-long relationship, and at the time I was feeling very poetic and very strong-willed. I wanted to remind myself. So it says trust, love, and live without limits. And I wanted a constant reminder that despite whatever I was feeling at that moment, that love was not the enemy, and that there are no limits that you put on your life that are put on your life other than the limits that we put on ourselves. Like if I wanted to, with no money on I could start to hike across the country to New York and try my best to live that life. Obviously, that's not 100% true, but I think as a general philosophy, like removing those limits that we put on ourselves is really important. And I wanted that reminder to be there every day. And a lot of people were like, don't do it. You've got a career, you've got this, or you've got, you're an actor, you can't taint your body or whatever. And I've never had that issue.
I was watching Altered Carbon, and the first season of Altered Carbon, I think Joel Kinnaman, I think is his name. He has a lot of tattoos, so it certainly takes time in the makeup chair before you're doing the shoot. But I don't see him struggling for work just because he's tattooed. So
no. When I was actually auditioning for The Chi, I think they were having a little bit of trouble understanding who Chef Dan was going to be. He was not named Chef Dan at first, he was named Chef Steve, and they're like, are you willing to shave your arms? And I was like, yeah, sure. They're like, okay, you've been put off hold. And I was like, what's the right answer there, right? And then they came back and they were like, are you willing to shave your head? And I was like, yeah. And they're like, we've taken you off hold. I don't understand what you want me to say here. I'm willing to do whatever I have to do.
Yeah.
But at that point, they were asking because they were thinking about making both of his arms totally tatted up. And I was just thinking about how much extra time that would take in a makeup chair.
Yeah.
So those are a little bit of the inside stories on how all of that happened. That was like a 3 or 4 month audition process.
Yeah. Let's actually dive in into the acting and your approach to it for a second. What do you take? There are a ton of techniques. There are a lot of methodologies. People use what works for them. What works for you?
Memorize the words. Just learn the words as best as you can and practice saying them out loud. Think about relationships. So like when I went to school, we were taught all sorts of different techniques. And then when I went to New York, it was about practicing little bits of those for when you need them, right? So you're not always going to need to apply technique to something that you might innately understand. But if you come up against a wall where you're having trouble understanding a role or a perspective or a scene or a moment, then you can take from these different techniques. I've always appreciated Meisner in the sense of hooking. Like, so if you have a line that says, would you like some tacos? My thing would be tacos. No, I'm good. And the line might just be, no, I'm good. But thinking tacos beforehand helps me understand that there's a reaction and then there is a verbal response. And so that helps me sometimes. Sometimes just not thinking. I was playing golf the other day with some friends and they were like, you don't take any practice swings, do you? And I'm like, no, I don't like to think. I think that thinking gets in my way quite a bit. I like to say that actors, well-trained actors, can make the best pizza in the world, and they shouldn't doubt their ability to make pizza. So like most of the time they're asking you for a pepperoni pizza, and you went to school to learn how to make the grandest of things, and it's pretty simple for you to make a pepperoni pizza. So I think for me, I pick from all of them, all of the ones that I've learned, and I've tried to avoid getting in my head about it. I think our job is a lot simpler than we make it sometimes. We are playing pretend after all, and I think we can get away from that. So uh, and certainly there's a place for it in certain shows and theaters, and but for me, I like what I like to use my instincts,
Yeah,
learn from my other actors and such.
makes sense. If you were to say who your acting inspiration is there such an actor that you look up to and say, yeah, that's where I'd like to be in terms of my craft?
Um, no, there's all sorts of, I don't know. I feel like I'm living my own thing here, and
Cool.
I think that there are careers that like musicians have had. I think for me, I go into this place of wanting to give 150% to everything that I do. And there is a style of production, right? Like in just producing as much work as you can. That isn't really that healthy for me, but I admire the people that have had careers like that. Like I look at uh, Bob Dylan's young career, and
Yeah.
the amount of work he was creating was absolutely incredible. I don't know if I'd want to be him in those situations. But then I look at work with like Denzel Washington, and I'm just absolutely blown away. But I don't know if I want anybody else's career but mine, you know?
Yeah, no, makes sense. Few things before we wrap up. And again, in doing my prep, I was looking at your resume, and one of the things that popped into my mind immediately that you do a Russian accent. So, being somebody who's a native Russian speaker, that immediately piqued my interest. So, where did you have to utilize it? And if you're up for it, I definitely want to hear it.
Oh man, I don't know if I like being put on the spot, but I will talk to you a little bit about where that came from over the years. So specifically last year, I played a Serbian, which is not the same thing, obviously, as a Russian. However, I remember watching an interview with an actor who had played a bunch of Bond villain type characters, and they were like, "So how do you get all these jobs, villains?" And he goes, "Well, most of them ask for an Eastern European to play the villain, and so some of them will be very specific. Can you do a Polish accent?" And he goes, "Yep." "Can you do a Russian accent?" And he goes, "Yep." "You do a Ukrainian accent?" He goes, "Yep." And then he does the same accent for all of them, and they don't know the difference.
Yep, I saw that same interview. I know exactly what you're talking about.
uh, yeah, okay, yeah. So I've done a lot of research on it, and really, um, I wouldn't want to do one right now for you, but it's definitely popped up in auditions that I've had to do,
Nice.
and I think just about anything that you put your mind to, you can get done. I always is like do it so much that you don't like being bad at it. You know, I don't think that like if you go out and you ice skate for the first time and you knew that you were going to ice skate every Wednesday for the rest of your life, you would get good at it really fast because nobody enjoys the process of being bad at something. And
Yeah.
so the self-teaching that we do, so long as we're generous with ourselves, can provide pretty quick growth. Maybe
Perfect.
we'll find out.
We'll see. After we end the recording, we're going to give it a try. Okay, and then last question, and the only same question that I ask all of my actor interviews is, if you had to give one bit of advice to your younger acting self, what would that be?
Oh man, that's tough. I think that my career at this point has been a series of mistakes that I've learned from. And if I could give myself one piece of advice, it would probably be to avoid some of those things. But I think I've learned so much from having made those mistakes that I wouldn't be where I am today had I not made them. But I think if there was one thing, it's that I don't need to be at a 10 in order to act well, right? So I don't need to be at my most emotionally vulnerable state all of the time in order to be an artist.
Yeah.
That there is balance in your life that is important. What else? Yeah, like I don't know, like I don't know how much I would change. Maybe be more patient. Yeah, keep learning about yourself. Maybe.
Yeah, there's no right or wrong answer. It's just interesting.
There's a right answer. There's a right answer. I just don't
Hey,
know what it is.
there's no right answer. It's like a casting director. All of the actors asking the casting director is, "What are you looking for?" There's no right answer, right? They don't know. They know approximately, and then they see it, and then somebody shows them something else that they like more, and then they go with that, and then they make recommendations, and the producers tell them they want something else. So there's no right answer.
I found the right answer. I figured it out. It is don't plan so much.
Mhm.
You know, there's a lot that happens in the audition room. There's a lot that happens on set that if you are so set in your ways for this is how I'm going to say this line or these are the things I'm going to do during this line, that you set yourself up for what feels like failure. And instead of setting yourself up for, like playing on the playground with your friends. Like I have all of the tools necessary to play tag with you, and it will always be different when I play it with you. And so I think like don't plan so much. Let yourself be surprised by the universe and by what happens when you just kind of let go of that control.
Perfect.
That's the right answer.
That's I'll take that. That certainly is a very good one. Thank you, Mick. I really appreciate it. Thanks for being a good guy. Thanks for being available to younger actors like myself in the Chicago community. And thanks for coming on.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, and thanks to everybody for tuning in. We appreciate it. Lots of other fun stuff to come. Lots of guests, actors, casting directors, acting coaches, producers, showrunners. Everybody is coming up. So stay tuned, subscribe, hit the bell, tell your friends, and thanks again for coming.